Okay,
It's recording.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Can't keep technology.
Just get it closer. Okay. Are you good?
Yeah, we're recording.
All right.
Okay, so from your LinkedIn, we took that you were a marketing instructor here at Eastern?
I am. So, let me introduce myself.
Yeah.
I'm Duane.
Okay.
I am a part-time lecturer in the marketing department. Been here for about 3 years. And I teach the contemporary selling course as well as graduate level customer relationship management. My history is the last 17 years of my career, I worked at IBM in marketing, primarily demand generation, and focused initially in the industries, and most of my career was focused on industry marketing, meaning selling solutions to various industries as opposed to selling hardware or software. And I wasn't selling, I was in marketing.
Okay.
Prior to that, I was in automotive marketing, working with Chrysler and Volkswagen Audi, and then a number of other marketing positions before that.
So what do you mean by selling solutions?
If a bank wants to improve its customer service,
Okay.
perhaps it needs to get identify a customer relationship software
Okay.
that will allow them to bring information together across the whole company, information that's gathered through customer service, through the branch operations, through loans, through retail banking, consolidate that into one database, and then be able to drive communications to the customer based on his needs, the frequency of what he's buying. In order to install that, you have to buy the software. It's going to take services to install that software and integrate it with all the other data sources.
Okay.
It'll have to reside on hardware. You'll need hard drives to hold this data and pull it together, and you'll need services to integrate it. That's considered a solution for banking.
Okay, so were you involved with that internationally then?
Yes.
So how does that fit together?
Yeah, so just real briefly, when I joined IBM, I joined as a demand generations manager and was focusing in North America, supporting a number of industries. After a few years, I moved into a position where I was supporting basically a skunk works within IBM, and we were on the very early cutting edge of wireless.
So what year was that?
I'm sorry?
What year was that? Can I give us a perspective?
Maybe 2001.
Okay.
Something like that, where wireless was just really starting to come in. The big solution to that point was trying to sell access points, routers,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, which is really basic, but at that time, that's where the industry was. As the technology kept growing, we started looking for applications of wireless and using RFID sensors. So we started matching or marrying RFID sensors to large area, broad Wi-Fi coverage, and we started coming up with ways that shipping companies can track containers as they come off the ship onto trucks, and as those trucks travel across the country, we knew where every container was. We could even tell if the truck went off track by a half mile or stopped when it wasn't supposed to. So those are the kinds of solutions. Then we started looking at, well, how can we apply the same technology to a city? What if the police were able to tap into all the video cameras and apply an assessment or intelligence to the video, where they could actually start watching for aberrations or crimes being taken, and they could start deploying police to high crime areas before the crimes actually happen.
So when you were working on the international things with the bank, explain to us how that interaction worked with the other countries that, so did you have to do consolidation of their financial statements then, or what part did you play?
Sure. Let me take that in two steps, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I initially was a North American marketing manager for industries, chemicals and petroleum, electronics, for instance. So my job was to put together a marketing budget, identify the new pieces of collateral, brochures, white papers that needed to be created, to get budgeting for that, which events we were going to go to, and what other kind of demand generation efforts. And I worked with our global team, who gave me strategic direction, but I operated globally, or operated in the US, but I also had peers in other countries, in Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Russia, India, Australia, and we would collaborate as individual
Over
region
email
managers.
or-
Email, primarily email and conference calls.
Okay.
And we would share information with each other, that I'm just doing this event, here's the success I had, here's why it was successful, I can share this with you to the other countries. It was good, but it really wasn't focused. Every country was doing its own thing.
Mhm.
When I moved into a global role
Excuse me,
in
just 1
marketing,
second. Help us understand why having every country do something different might not be a good thing.
sure, what everyone did in their country is what their country general manager wanted them to do. And each country had different priorities. Some countries, the general managers would go after the easy sales and say, I don't want to sell that solution, it's too hard, it takes too long, I want to sell this because I can get more sales and we can be more successful. Or I don't think that solution is really relevant for the banks in Brazil. That's something that I don't think they're far enough along to take advantage of it.
And was that
And
something
yet,
that you
from a
guys
global
did?
standpoint, IBM says, that's where we want to go. We want you to teach them why they need to do this.
Mhm.
So that's where the local managers or marketing people sometimes didn't do what global wanted to do.
And is
Does
that
that
what
answer
you
your question?
communicated though? Like,
Okay.
did you communicate that with them, like that wasn't what you wanted to do?
But you weren't
Yeah.
in charge of them at the time.
I wasn't in charge of them at the time.
Okay.
That's what
Um,
he's trying to say.
So the
Okay.
biggest problem was that, from a marketing standpoint, I would get directions and say, we want you to promote this.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
At the higher level,
Okay, so you were in marketing at this time.
yeah,
The
always
actual-
in marketing.
So what he's saying is that he was the peer of all these other people in all the different countries, and everybody had the same responsibility. All countries were equal. And so the other part of why this wouldn't work is because every country had different type of message and kind of branding, how they presented the message to each country. So that would dilute what the global perspective was having. Am I pretty much saying
Well, it
what you're
wasn't so
also
much diluting, it was inconsistent.
inconsistent
And
and
it was not only the
brand,
messaging, but the look, the feel, the messaging.
the branding.
Every country was doing their own kind of advertising for their own products in the way that they thought was most appropriate.
Mhm.
So IBM looked like 150 different companies
That's
globally.
branding, right, exactly. Exactly. Go ahead. So help
So,
us understand how.
When I got
yeah.
moved into a global role,
Mhm.
my responsibility was to herd all of these goats together
Okay.
and get them all singing out of the same hymnal. Same messaging, same look and feel, same priorities, and it sounds easy, but the reality is it's not. It's
It's-
very difficult.
Yeah,
Because, as I said, the local marketing managers reported to the local executives. They didn't report into global marketing. So I had no control over them. I didn't give them reviews, I didn't control their paycheck. Their local manager does. So as a result, their loyalty is to their local manager to do what he wants them to do. So what I needed to do was work with the global leader, the general manager for an industry, and say, I need your help to accomplish what you want, so give me the authority to control the budget, the marketing budget, and how much is gonna be allocated to each country, and to tell them how the money is supposed to be used.
So
Good.
did that like prompt you to have to travel a lot around the world globally, or just within?
I really didn't have to travel.
Okay.
That's one of the wonderful things in the last 10 years with the, I'd say 10, 12 years, with the real growth of the internet and a lot of the communication capabilities. We didn't use Skype. We didn't use any kind of real face-to-face like FaceTime or anything. It's very slow, it's very expensive, technology wasn't really available, and most marketing people work out of their house. And nobody wants to come on a camera in their nightgown with their hair still messed up because they haven't taken a shower till 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Globally, in other countries.
In this country too.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So what period of time was that? What years were?
The mid-2000s.
Okay, so, when I was international, marketing manager, I did travel.
Mhm.
I went to Bangkok, and I went to the UK constantly, cause that's where, our other hub was. So, but we did do a lot of face-to-face, we did a lot of international trade shows, so.
And
but
we did too.
We did some, we did more of these conference calls using the big screen,
Yeah.
that kind of thing, and with this huge spider. Did you have any of those
With
spiders?
customers or internal meetings?
Internal meetings.
Yeah. No, IBM prefers, and the employees prefer not to use video. What has
Yeah,
worked really
they were
well.
phone calls, you're right.
They're conference calls. So I lived on the phone. So and as a result, you become very, very adept at managing your time. If you have a conference call from 2 to 2:30 with these 3 points on the agenda, you don't waste 7 or 8 minutes saying, hi, how are you doing, how are the kids, because you've just used 15% of your time. And if you have to present, get their feedback, and then get a commitment, you have to be very, very direct and on topic the whole time.
Wow, I just was reading all the Saudi Arabia, case studies.
About Western culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Versus the Saudi culture and
They're
how.
relaxed, laid back.
So did you deal with any cultural differences? Like
There are a
that?
lot of cultural differences. Part of it is the loyalty to the local general manager, which had to be overcome. Many cultures, it's very appropriate for them to be deferential to someone they perceive as being in a higher status. Because I was in a global capacity, the global team was viewed as more important or higher status than a regional team. So I would get a lot of, yes, we understand, oh, yes, and then they turn around and just go do what they want.
Right.
And they say, oh, didn't understand. Where you knew they understood, they're just ignoring you. So if you can't try to convince them, then you have to pull out the hammer. And the hammer is, okay, here's what we're doing. I'm now in control of your budget. You tell me what events you want to do this year. I'll tell you which ones I will fund. And you will do those, and I will give you the messaging. I'll tell you what solutions, what images to use. You go run it, you drive it, you have the goals, you achieve the leads and prospects and the lead revenue projections. But I'm gonna tell you what to sell, and I'm gonna provide the funding. And if you wanna do those other events, you have to go find the source for the money, locally or otherwise.
What years were you in charge of the global funding?
From about 2005 through 13.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did you feel that between the different cultures that you work with in different countries, did you feel that there was a ranging level of respect when working with them, or was it across the board the same? About for you as up in a management position?
IBM has a very a great culture in that it demands, it warrants, it expects respect among employees. Unlike a lot of companies where you may work where you have really poor managers who abuse and take advantage of people, and they're very, have a bloated ego.
Mhm.
IBM doesn't allow that, so there's always a lot of respect on the phone. Where the money comes down to the table is, do they follow up on what
Okay.
they say they're gonna do?
Mhm.
And that's where you have to start holding them accountable, and that's the way you do it. If you try not to, nobody wants to embarrass somebody in front of others especially. But there are times when you have to say, I gave you $400,000 to do this event.
Mhm.
You were predicting you'd get me $100 million in leads, and you spent $450,000, and I only see $35 million in leads. What happened? Why should I continue
Mhm.
to support you? Why should I continue to invest money in your country anymore? And, eventually this would go to his boss as well. So it's more of the carrot and stick
Okay.
approach, but always done with respect.
Okay.
So aside from the cultural differences, do you speak another language?
I don't.
Would you recommend it to somebody involved in international business?
Yeah, I think there were times when I wish I did. It would have facilitated.
Any language in particular?
It depends on the company that you're
Right.
working for and where they work.
Okay.
So if you're working primarily in Europe,
Mhm.
I'd say, look at French or Spanish.
Mhm.
If you're working in Asia Pacific, probably Chinese.
Mhm.
Japanese would be good as well. If you're working South America, it almost has to be Spanish,
Mhm.
or more specifically Portuguese. But throughout Europe, everyone speaks English. It's pretty much the same throughout the Asia Pacific.
I found that, and yes, I agree with you, absolutely, all the way across the board.
Yep.
I found that I don't speak another language either, and that has been, in my own opinion, it hasn't really caused me trouble, but I really regret not
Right.
doing it. It
Yeah.
would have benefited me. However, in Asia, I found that they communicate in English, because even in China, they have to communicate in English because the top speaks a different dialect than the bottom. So, and
Yeah,
all the
there's
French,
different
the
dialects.
Korean,
Mhm.
Korea and Mandarin don't speak the same language, obviously, so they have to speak in English.
English has kind of
it's-
evolved to be the
it-
business language.
It is
That's
the
right.
business language, and so I felt right at
Yeah.
home. Lucky
And
me.
they- what I found is the Chinese and the Japanese that I dealt with, they want to speak English because they want to
Absolutely.
improve their English, because they know it's one of the paths that will help them become more successful in their career if they can fluently speak English.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Through all of this, was it difficult to make time for family? Because you said you spent a lot of time on the phone.
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of international travel, but for a lot of this time, I wore two hats. I was the global leader for an industry, but I also was the North American leader.
Oh, you still have that responsibility.
I still had that responsibility. So whenever we had an event in North America, I would have to go to it. So I was traveling about twice a month for 2 to 3 days
Wow.
each.
So 50% of the time almost?
No, that wasn't quite that
30
much,
maybe?
maybe 25 to 30.
That's still a lot.
Yeah, and that was very tiring, very exhausting. And I went from roughly 50,000 miles a year, air miles a year, to nothing when I switched jobs and went from this one industry into banking. And my role as a global leader was to, and this was a strategic change that IBM made. Prior to my moving into that role, the global team went to all the global events. They were on site. They developed, ran, produced, and managed the global events. The strategic change we made was we need to rely on the local teams and help bring up their expertise. So global will provide the funding, will provide the strategic direction, meaning what solutions, messaging, graphics, etc. And we will have weekly calls with the local team, and it's just like planning the event. They're telling us what they've done, what they've not done. We're holding them accountable. Well, have you checked this? Have you gotten this yet? Show us, send us the copy or the draft of the promotional piece, and we would be the overseers, if you were.
Did you have translators? Because I had to have a lot of translators because it's all in the native language, and then so I did brochures in 13 different languages. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, we had translating services available to us, but most of what they did in 2 languages. Even in China, they would produce it in Mandarin or Cantonese and English, mainly because there's a lot of business people that are very comfortable with English as a language.
Right, they use
So
mine in English, and then they produced a local one in the native language.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what it said in their language clearly. So we used a translation service so that I could understand. That's kind of was my question.
Yeah, so we would
if you were
help them.
overseeing it, I'm just trying to understand how you knew what it said.
We would help them develop the English version, and then we would allow them to do the translation locally.
Okay, so they just did it, and you just
Yeah.
took their word that it was said what you
Yeah,
thought
that's
it
part of
should
that mutual respect that you
Yeah,
have to
say.
have.
Okay.
So through all of it though, through the communication with the other countries and working with them, what's been the hardest part of the international business?
Recognizing that every country is different and unique. The customers they sell to have different sets of problems regionally, and the management regionally has different priorities. So trying to get the marketing people to buy in to the global effort, I think, is one. The language differences became problems, especially in dealing with Asia Pacific. They want to speak to you in English, but they're not well practiced, and as a result, oftentimes it's very, very difficult to understand them over the phone. And there were times we would spend 12, 15 minutes trying to get one idea clear between us. It was very slow, very tedious, and it was frustrating on both sides.
What time were your calls?
The calls for Asia Pacific were normally 9, 10, or 11 o'clock at night. And the calls to Europe were normally 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning.
It's really
Because
rough to have
it's-
them in the
yeah.
same day.
Europe's 5, 6, 7 hours ahead, depending on how far.
Australia?
India was a tough one because that was 12-hour difference.
Australia, India, yeah.
Yeah, same with us, yeah. And another thing as a result of that time difference is things took longer to get done. So for instance, if I created a draft of a cover letter to go out, I would send it out to India or China and say, here's my draft, why don't you work on that and send me back a revision? Well, it's 12 hours before they get into the office. Then they need a day to kind of work on it, have other people see it before they send it back. By the time they get back to me, it's 3 days later. So the whole planning process for an event, which we could do in North America in 4 to 5 months effectively, we would need 8 to 9 months in order to make sure we had enough time. And then some of it is their priorities are different. When we planned an event in North America, we would plan 6 months in advance. We knew what had to be done, how far out, etc. When I was dealing with China, we would have calls starting 9 months in advance, and they go, yes, 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 yes. And, oh, we're coming along, and all of a sudden we're 4 or 5 months out, and none of this work has begun, only to find out that they do everything at the last minute. Everything's done, within 3 months of the event, where for us, we have to have this stuff locked down 4, 5, 6 months in advance.
Yeah.
It's caused a lot of frustration.
So were they able to, I mean, we do it in North America because if you don't secure that particular venue, it's gone, somebody else took it. Is it the same way, if they delay in doing it, does that mean that those venues are gone like us, or did you find that those venues, if they delayed, that they still could get what they needed?
That was one of the other big areas. So like if we were putting on a major event in China, we'd say, not only do we want the event, we want to take our best customers out for a nice evening of entertainment.
Absolutely.
Can you come back with us with some ideas of entertainment? And we said, a dinner cruise or, a dinner at an Imperial Palace or something that would be very unique.
Mhm.
Well, the marketing team there, because there's so few of them, they didn't do any of this. They would have to call a local service and give that job to them, hire them to come back with some ideas, an
Mhm.
agency. So that, again, added all this extra time, and added extra costs.
Just out of curiosity, what kind of thing would they suggest in China as an entertainment thing?
Yeah, interesting, because some of the things that they focused on were not as lavish as Americans are accustomed or
Mhm.
Europeans are accustomed to doing for your best customers. I mean, you've got customers that are giving you $100, $200, $300 million for the business. You don't take them to McDonald's. You don't just bring in a guitar player at a dinner and call that good. You want something really phenomenal. You want to bring in, the native dancers in Japan who do, the whole geisha
Mhm.
outfit. But you have to get that across to the local team. You have to give them examples of what you want to see and the quality. And you have to push them sometimes
Mhm.
because
And you have to do it over the phone.
it's all over the phone, or send me the PowerPoint, let's look at it.
Mhm.
One of the things that really accelerated our planning process in the last few years was same time,
Mhm.
Lotus Same Time, which is the same as Instant Messenger.
Mhm.
But we had the ability to load up a PowerPoint, and we could send a PowerPoint like that across the
Yeah.
world. Email often took too long, but we could just load up a PowerPoint, and then using the tools, we could actually point to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like we want these dancers in this uniform, but we want to look like this, and
Yeah.
we got things done much faster because of the collaboration tools like Lotus Notes and
Mhm.
and some of the others.
Did you have cultural differences where dancers were allowed and other places where dancers weren't allowed? Did you run into any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, for instance, one of the ways that, one of the things we like to do at major events is host a cocktail party at our booth for our primary customers or prospects, or in a room off the show floor,
Mhm.
and have, a very elaborate food set up and bar and comfortable. We couldn't do that in Saudi Arabia.
Illegal.
Well, it's illegal, and they will actually tolerate it, but IBM, in trying to be respectful
Mhm.
of our IBM partners, deferred to the local customs there
Mhm.
on what we could or could not do.
So to wrap everything up, what's the most important thing you have to do in order to be successful in international business?
I think you have to be respectful of the local staff and the customs. I think you have to understand their point of view and the constraints that they're dealing under, because there are legal constraints that we haven't touched on, but there are things that we do in America as second nature that they just can't do, using databases and direct marketing, for instance. And I think you have to be patient with the local team, because they have issues locally that they have to work through that they just take for granted that or understand.
Right.
And a lot of times you have to ask a lot of questions, kind of peel back the onion and say, well, what's the real problem here? And once you find out, a lot of times from a global perspective, we could cut through that easily and get them the okay. They're afraid to ask. Yeah.
Because culturally, it's not acceptable to ask.
That's right.
Mhm.
But in other cases, there's resentment against a global team coming in, trying to tell them what to do.
Sure.
So, it's the old, I'm from headquarters, I'm here to help you,
Mhm.
meaning I'm gonna tell you what to do and how to do it,
Yeah.
because you don't know what you're doing, so there's that fear of being insulted.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful on how you approach and work with people.
All right, guys, do you have any last question?
I have one question.
Mhm.
Was it difficult with travel and doing all these conference calls? Was that ever a issue?
Oh yeah, I used to vacation in Arizona for a couple weeks, take a week's vacation, and then work remotely. That's one of the wonderful things about IBM, is that as long as you have internet access and a PC and a telephone, you're working.
Yeah.
That's also one of the most terrible things, is you're working
Yeah.
12, 14, 16 hours a day. And I'd be getting up at 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in Arizona to take a call with China or with Europe, and then, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. Yeah, so that was challenging. I'm sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for
Sure.
joining us, I appreciate it. Can you go around the room and just kind of say who you are for the camera?
I'm Jess Kovacs.
Thank you.
Carlos Campos.
Dwayne Dove.
Dwayne Nudd,
Megan Erkinen?
Diane Sheldon-Ku. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.